Undercover boss orders breakfast at his restaurant, freezes when he sees a young boy cleaning tables. Michael Foster, 50 years old, founder of the New Dawn chain, disguised himself as an ordinary customer and sat down to order breakfast at a suburban branch. His eyes had barely swept across the counter when they froze. His heart felt as if it had been clenched inside his chest. A boy, barely 12 years old, was hunched over cleaning tables, his hands trembling as he held the rag. Tired eyes, hair damp with sweat. That boy should have been in school, so why was he here? Michael gripped the edge of his chair, a sharp pain rising in his heart. How could a system known for its humanity allow a child to work like this? At that very moment, a bigger question burst forth stronger than any financial report he had ever held in his hands. What had happened in the place he once trusted so deeply? One early winter morning, his breath still clinging to the glass, Michael, in a dark sweater and an old baseball cap, walked into a suburban branch. The restaurant was quiet, the yellow light trickling through the window panes, the air carrying a hint of the morning chill. The faint sound of a spoon tapping against a coupa fragile heartbeat of a weary diner. Michael chose a table by the window, his hand lightly gripping a cup of black coffee, his eyes quietly observing every staff member as they moved about. He hoped that in the place he had trusted and built would find the spirit of service he had envisioned from the very beginning. But in that dim light, a sudden sense of alienation crept into his heart. Michael sipped the black coffee, his hand gently swirling the spoon to dispel the morning's chill. His eyes drifted to the service counter, then abruptly stopped. A small boy, thin and frail, in a uniform far too large for him, was hunched over wiping tables. Each motion slow, his eyes distant. Michael could hardly believe what he saw. The boy was no more than 12 years old, his frame hauntingly gaunt. Michael waited until the boy passed his table, then quietly asked, "Have you had breakfast yet?" The boy flinched slightly, clutching the rag tight. His answer was soft as a sigh. "My mom told me to work extra so I can buy my books." Michael's eyes darkened. He looked up at the slogan board of New Dawn on the wall. Respect begins with the first meal of the day. A system he had once been proud of now had a child working extra shifts to buy books. In that instant, Michael realized the system had strayed from the philosophy he had once poured blood, sweat, and tears into building. And if he didn't act, the two would be complicit. Michael lingered longer, his hands still on the now cold coffee cup, his gaze following every step the small boy took. Every time a customer left the table, the boy hurried to clean it, arranging things neatly as if that were the only way to ensure he wouldn't be forgotten. He called the shift manager over, pretending to be a curious customer. "What's that kid doing here? Isn't he supposed to be in school?" The manager hesitated, eyes darting away. "The kid asked to help out a few shifts to help his mom pay for school. We took pity and let him work a bit, sir." Michael's throat tightened as he listened, but the next words chilled him to the bone. "But I have to let him work as a helper. No contract, no insurance. Tips get pooled and shared at the end of the week. But actually the kid doesn't get any, since he's just a helper, sir." At that moment, Michael heard a stifled sigh from behind the counter. He turned. There stood the boy, eyes red, clutching a small piece of paper in his apron. The paper slipped and unfolded before Michael's eyes. "I work to buy books. Mom says to be a good person, you have to go to school." Beneath the shaky handwriting was a list of tips every day, every meal, every dollar. But they were all crossed out, replaced by a bright red line, "Manager kept." Michael froze. A child trying to hold on to his dignity with trembling lettershad revealed a painful truth. The very people entrusted with managing were enabling the injustice Michael had once sworn would never happen. Michael's heart constricted. He had once believed that New Dawn was a place where fairness was nurtured from the first breakfast. But no, it was trampling on the very people it was supposed to protect. If he didn't act today, he'd be the one letting that boy bow his head and lose faith. Michael kept his eyes on the boy, his heart aching as he thought of the nights his own son had studied by the glow of a desk lamp, eyes red from exhaustion, but at least with a warm home and a decent breakfast. Meanwhile, this boy cleaning table after table, greeting customer after customer, had to hide the reward for his hard work in a crumpled piece of paper. He took a deep breath, set his coffee cup down on the table, his determination swelling like a tide. Michael knew that if he didn't cross the line of silence today, then the promise of a fair system he had built would become an empty phrase. Michael stood up gently and walked over to the boy. The boy flinched, clutching his apron as if bracing himself. His eyes met Michael's, half hopeful, half afraid. "What's your name?" Michael's voice was calm, warm but firm. My name's Nam." The boy's voice was small, his trembling hand wiping away tears that hadn't yet dried. Michael nodded. He bent down to meet the boy's gaze, his voice steady and sure. Nam, you are not invisible. Your work deserves to be recognized starting today. Right at that moment, turning point number 2, from behind the counter, the manager stepped out, his eyes shifting when he saw Michael holding Nam's tip sheet. His gaze darted away, a flicker of panic on his face. Michael stood tall, the paper still in his hand, his voice firm and clear. How do you explain Nam's tips and the lack of a contract, no insurance? The air seemed to thicken, filled only with the heavy breathing of those present. Nam's eyes lit up as if he had just seen a lifeline appear in the freezing ocean. Michael knew this confrontation wasn't just about a few dollars in tips, but about the very soul of New Dawn. Could it still hold the warmth of the first day he laid its foundation? Or had it become a soulless machine that only counted shifts in revenue? He tightened his grip on the paper, turned his back to the manager, and looked straight at Nam, his voice softening. I promise you, starting tomorrow, you won't have to record your tips on an old scrap of paper anymore. And everyone like you will be recognized by name for their hard work. Nam's eyes widened. Tears of joy welled up and fell onto the cold, gray tile floor. And for the first time that cold morning, Michael felt the truth. Fairness sometimes it doesn't start with reports, but with the eyes of a child, eyes that dare to dream of a fairer tomorrow. A system is built to serve people, not to turn children into labor. Michael Foster returned to the New Dawn branch this time, without his old coat or pulled-down beanie. His white shirt was neatly ironed, his tie properly knotted. On his face, his eyes were cold and tinged with disappointment, as if his very trust had been betrayed. The restaurant lights were still on. The sound of clinking dishes filled the air, but every gaze fell silent when Michael pushed the door open. The shift manager, standing behind the counter, looked startled, his hands fumbling between the POS machine and a stack of receipts. The boy still stood nearby, clutching his frayed cleaning cloth, eyes timid as if bracing for a storm. Michael didn't need a preamble. His voice rang out deep, yet enough to drown out every other sound. I want all employees present here, right now. In the small back room, the harsh neon light shone on anxious faces. Michael plugged a small USB drive into the POS screen. A hidden camera video began to play. The boy thin, trembling as he cleaned tables, his eyes tense, every move cautious as if afraid of breaking something more fragile than any dish. The room fell silent. Michael looked up, his eyes sweeping across the crowd, then stopping at the shift manager. His voice turned sharp, cold enough to make the air freeze. You turn this place into a sweatshop for a child? The shift manager lowered his head, sweat beading on his temple. No one dared to meet his gaze. Michael didn't wait for any excuses. His voice rang out as solid as a hammer, smashing the trust of everyone present. Fire the shift manager, effective immediately. He turned to the staff. His voice softened, but his eyes remained serious. From today on, every New Dawn employee must be at least 16 years old, with a clear contract and transparent wages. No child will ever have to bow their head and ask for a shift just to buy textbooks. He paused, took a deep breath. Then he turned to the boy, his eyes shining with a gentle light the boy had never seen in this workplace. I'm sorry this happened. From now on, I'll cover your school fees until the end of the year. And your mother, she'll get support too, so she doesn't have to send you out here to work. The boy's eyes welled up. His lips pressed tight, a hot tear fell onto the cold tile floor. Michael stood tall, his hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder like a promise. At New Dawn, justice would no longer be just a story on paper. In that moment, the room seemed to light up a hint of new hope, of a system that knows how to recognize, how to correct mistakes, and most importantly, how to stand tall for what's right. A system is built to serve people, not to turn children into labor. The next morning, the dawn light filtered through the glass windows of the New Dawn branch, casting a glow on Michael Foster's crisp gray suit. Today he returned, no old coat, no beanie pulled down over his face. His eyes were sharp like a blade newly drawn from its sheath. The cafe fell silent as Michael stepped in. Every eye turned to him. The boy, small and thin, still holding his cleaning cloth, froze for a moment, his dark eyes wide, his hands trembling. Michael took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over each person. Then he spoke loudly, his voice deep and resolute. I want every employee here, right now. In the small meeting room, the white light illuminated anxious faces. Michael plugged the USB into the POS screen, and a video started playing. The boy hunched over, cleaning tables, his eyes tired but his hands steady. A customer asked a question, and the boy gave a faint smile. I work to buy books. My mother says to be a good person you have to go to school. A sigh was heard. The entire room fell silent. Right after the video ended, Michael suddenly pulled another chair to the middle of the room, placing it next to the boy. He sat down at eye level with him, his eyes softening but his voice still sharp as steel. "Son, what grade are you in?" The boy froze, his lips pressed together. "Seventh grade." Michael leaned in, looking the boy straight in the eye, his voice firm but warm. "Do you know that no one is allowed to work here if they're under the legal working age?" The boy lowered his head, tears welling in his eyes. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Michael stood up abruptly, his eyes blazing, his voice loud and clear. "Fire the shift manager immediately, no written warning needed. Implement a new policy. No child will be allowed to work here unless they're of legal working age. Every employee must have a clear contract and be paid fairly. New Dawn will cover this boy's school tuition until the end of the academic year, so he can study properly just like his mother taught him." The entire room felt a weight lift. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger, like a drum roll signaling a time of change. Michael turned to the boy, his eyes gentle yet determined. "You don't need to work to buy books. You need to be in school. And from today on, I'll make sure of that." "You." The room lit up. A breeze blew through a small crack in the window, carrying the scent of freshly baked pancakes. But this time, that scent wasn't just of flour and butter. It was the smell of a system being cleansed by what's right. Next to the boy, Michael kept his gaze steady, like a promise being ignited. He placed his hand lightly on the boy's shoulder, a simple gesture, but enough to let everyone in the room know this was no longer just a story about a breakfast or a tip. This was a story about how a system once built to honor kindness had forgotten its own purpose. Michael raised his head and looked straight at the managers and staff. "You've seen what I've seen. You know New Dawn wasn't created to turn a child into a labor tool, let alone to crush the hopes of someone just because of profit." He paused, his voice softening, giving everyone a moment to reflect. "I know sometimes a system can lose its way, but it's up to us, the ones standing here, to call it back to the right path." Michael looked around, his voice warm but firm. "I want everyone to remember, tips are a customer's thank you for dedicated service. They are recognition, not a commodity to be bargained with or held back for any reason." He pulled out his phone and opened a new app he'd prepared the night before. "And starting today, I've approved a new feature in New Dawn's POS system. Every tip, whether by card or cash, will automatically go to the server whose name is on the receipt. No manager will handle it. No one can hold it back except the person who actually served the guest." The whole room seemed to hold its breath, and then all eyes turned to the boy. He looked up at Michael, his lips trembling. "Uncle, can I really go back to school now?" Michael nodded, his gaze softening. "Yes, you'll go to school, and you'll grow up properly without having to bow your head to do what this system should have protected you from." "Idu." A round of applause broke out, louder, warmer, and seemingly longer than ever before. Amid that applause, Michael knew that he, too, was being healed of the guilt that had weighed heavily on him through the long night. A new breeze swept into the room, carrying the scent of fresh pancakes. And for the first time in many years, Michael felt that New Dawn had truly returned to the mission he had once envisioned. A place where no one had to sacrifice their childhood to get an education. A place where no one had to quietly wipe tables with trembling hands, just hoping one day to be called by name. A week later, the boy was no longer standing quietly behind the counter, but appeared in the schoolyard holding books, with a backpack funded entirely by New Dawn along with new uniforms. He raised his head to the national flag fluttering in the wind, his eyes sparkling as if to say, "I now have a path to walk on. I no longer need to wipe tables to buy books." Oh, free. At each New Dawn branch, a new sign was posted, a handwritten message from Michael. Every employee of legal working age, with clear contracts and fair wages. No one is allowed to work here if they're underage. No one should have to trade their childhood for a breakfast. End of. In an emergency board meeting, as Michael presented the new policy, a regional manager stood up in opposition. "If we stop hiring child servers, who's going to clear tables as quickly as that boy did? Efficiency might drop." Michael looked him straight in the eye, his voice low but resolute. "Efficiency means nothing if it's built on the sweat of children who've never had a real childhood. We're not just selling breakfast, we're selling trust. And if we lose that trust, this system has no value at all." One morning, Michael returned to the branch where everything had begun. The table by the window where he had once sat and watched was still there. On the table, there were no performance reports or invoices, just a small piece of paper, its handwriting immature but neat. "Thank you, Uncle, for letting me be a student, not an employee." Michael held the paper, his hand trembling slightly, his eyes looking out through the window where the morning sun was filtering in. He knew that if he hadn't acted that day, the boy might have forever lost a piece of his childhood. Michael gently placed the small paper back on the table. The warmth from the freshly brewed coffee still spread, but inside him, an even warmer feeling was rising. He looked around the cafe faces of staff, still busy, but different from before. There were smiles, confident eyes, a sense of belonging. A new staff member walked by, holding a menu and smiling warmly. "Mr. Michael, thank you for giving me the chance to work properly. Before, I had to beg for shifts just to afford books. Now I don't have to anymore." Michael squeezed his shoulder lightly, his eyes glowing with pride. "This isn't just a diner. This is where we respect people first." Near the pancake counter, Michael saw the new manager appointed after the previous one had been fired, patiently guiding a young staff member on how to greet guests with a genuine smile. A sign posted at the counter read, "Tips, 100% given directly to the server. No middlemen, no exceptions." Now, every New Dawn branch served not just hot pancakes, but also the light of kindness recorded on every receipt and every glance. At every morning meeting, the new manager always reminded everyone, "We don't just sell pancakes, we sell trust, and no one is allowed to trade that trust for profit." Michael understood, a system can't just look good on paper. It only truly lives when every person is called by name and is seen. That's why he decided to personally visit every branch periodically, not with performance reports, but with the eyes and smiles of those who serve. And, as the sunlight streamed through the window, Michael smiled. He knew. New Dawn now truly lived up to its name, a New Dawn, not just of breakfasts, but of trust preserved intact.